Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webcast, Three Steps to Measure and Maximize Impact of Employee Engagement in 2020, sponsored by Infido. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. You will receive an email from hr.com within 2 business days. It will include the certification credit information. You may also log into hr.com and go to your View My Credits page, where you can see the credits that you have received. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on Q&A in your webinar controls and type them in. And now I'm going to introduce our presenter for today. Tanma is a young entrepreneur from India who has successfully helped enterprises adopt AI in HR to increase top talent retention, enhance employee experience, and diagnose culture issues using predictive people analytics. His company, Infido, launched an engagement bot in that market that is talking to more than 300,000 employees across 100 plus enterprises like GE, Puma, Domino's to make their voice feel heard and valued. His company got funded on the spot at India's version of Shark Tank. He is also known as the youngest millennial speaker to address HR leadership in organizations like Fidelity, PwC, GE, Schneider, Microsoft, etc. Take it away, Tanma.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Kathy. Hi, everybody. As you can clearly see, I'm a huge fan of Dilbert, but I thought I'll start straight away and jump into the agenda for you today. I think the agenda and the schedule hr.com has built for all of us is absolutely fantastic. But for me today, I'll cover just 5 points with you, as you can see on your screen. Do particularly note the second one, which is very close to me because I'm very thankful to have met over 200 to 300 HR leaders across the world and really understand from the honest and common mistakes that they've made. So that's one to wait for. The others, of course, are very interesting as well. But these are 5 areas you will cover. I'll make sure I pause after each one of these areas so that you have time to ask me as many questions as you want. We have a good 15 to 20 minutes in the end for questions. And I think, Kathy, it's time to jump right in. So the first one is the constructive employee engagement. And I think it's very important for all of you to know my story, where I come from. So this was about 7 years back. I was in my university days where I had started with the mission of making the voice of every employee feel heard and valued. And frankly speaking, for the first 3 years, I was completely blind. And when I say blind, it's an understatement because I was failing left, right, and center. And there was actually just one moment after 3 years of starting up this company that opened my eyes. And it was a moment when I was in a classroom. It was a lecture in my university called Visual Construct and Built Environment, where the professor just actually asked just one question to the entire classroom that, guys, is there anything that you know that you've not seen, you've not heard, you've not felt? Is there anything that you know that you've not seen, you've not heard, or you've not felt? And I think he kept asking the question over and over, and we realized that there is no answer. And if you really think about it, a construct as simple as a blue or a pink is fed in our minds from the very first second we're born, that perhaps the blue is for guys and pink is for girls, which unfortunately is a bias we have from the very first second we're born. And I think that's the moment where it not only sort of scared me to know that I'm a part of a construct, it also empowered me to know that, okay, we can create our own things because ultimately everything is a construct. And I think the biggest reason why this is relevant for all of us today is that for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years you've spent in the HR space, there are a lot of constructs, biases, and learnings you carry, of course, which for the next 20 to 30 minutes, I would request all of you to sort of let go of this so-called baggage and look at employee engagement from scratch today. I'm sure all of us can do that. And I'm sure all of us have heard of these lines a million times. Of course, everybody is trying to justify the ROI of engagement, attrition, cost of backfills, of course, the disengagement cost. We know all of this, right? So I assume that the audience here is mature enough, understands engagement. but we're going to let go of some baggage and start from scratch, right? So I think I'm very excited. I hope all of you are. Moving on to the most intriguing and exciting piece for the day. I actually got a chance to interact with the ex-CEO of Great Place to Work, in addition to these 200 HR leaders in 50 countries. And luckily, because I'm just a 25-year-old today who started at the age of 18, all of them were very, very honest with their feedback and with their mistakes. And they actually went ahead and said that employee engagement in the last 10 to 15 years has felt good, but hasn't really made a tangible, measurable impact. So when they started questioning the value of engagement themselves, I had to probe in and understand the two mistakes. Number one, being, of course, that annual engagement surveys are on a massive decline, right? I think we see Gartner's data on the screen, but a lot of us don't need to know that because we understand how the need for real-time engagement is kicking in. But a very strong statement made earlier this year in 2019 was that surveys are actually inhuman, right? And if you really break it down, if you think about it, our workforce has evolved over the last 30 years, but perhaps a Gallup Q12 or an IBM Connexa, an Aon Hewitt are the exact same in the last 30 years. I mean, we've come over like all kinds of technology changes in the last 10, 20, 30 years, even the last 5 years, but these annual engagement surveys have not changed. An Aon Hewitt still has a say, stay, strive. A Gallup Q12 still asks you, even after you complete 30 years in your company, have you made a best friend at work, right? So, of course, we all understand that this needs a massive change. But if you look at the fundamentals, here's what I understood. What I understood is that the reason why employees hate this now is because we're asking them the same questions at the same time once every year. And because of our benchmarking issues, these questions don't even change year on year, right? And in a time where the average tenure has dropped to 4 years from 15 years, and the HR business partners to employee ratios ranging from 200:1 or 500:1, it is a massive problem, right? So of course, number one is that surveys are inhuman. But the second one was even more exciting, as you see my screen. And a very interesting article by Harvard Business Review came out that 58% of employees would actually trust a stranger more than their own manager. Think about it. Almost 60% of employees would trust a stranger more than their own manager, which essentially means that if we have 100 participants today, more than half of us would trust a stranger more than our own manager. And the elephant in the room I wanted to address today was that we ourselves as HR believe that if a survey is not anonymous, maybe employees will not be honest, and maybe the quality of the data will suffer, right? So if we ourselves as HR feel that there is a need for anonymity, there is an innate culture of mistrust, these are three issues we definitely have to address. Because if you think about it, my favorite analogy is that if someone knocks to you on your front door, you step out and find an unsigned handwritten complaint on your doorstep. You look around, you look up, you look down, you look at the street, wondering which neighbor left you that unsigned note. And of course, over time, you slowly just close the door. You're very frustrated. You're not sure about this. You feel uncomfortable. And if you think about it, that's exactly how anonymous feedback feels. And that's exactly how our anonymous engagement surveys are actually disengaging employees and building a culture of mistrust, right? Similarly, at the same time, we also wish to drive a certain sense of accountability, a certain sense of ownership when employees share their feedback, right? And if they feel that the reason why they don't want to share feedback is because they're afraid of a backlash, it's actually not a survey problem, it's a leadership problem, right? And I think that's where a leadership training or a manager training on how to sensitively handle feedback or how to empathetically handle feedback is way more important than perhaps finger pointing at a survey. And looking at surveys, of course, the third point, more often than not, we feel that over the last 30 years, it's survey fatigue and overload of feedback. But if you think about it, and I'll pause here, It's actually the lack of action fatigue that causes distress in employees. And if you think about it, there are about 80% of employees who feel that despite giving feedback, nothing will change. So the whole exercise is futile, right? So of course, I'd love to recap. Number one, if you notice my screen, surveys are inhuman. Number two, trust is toast, right? These are two mistakes that hundreds of CHROs and HR leaders have made, and I hope none of us repeat them and learn from them. But moving on, I'd love to sort of talk about the 3 steps you can take to measure and maximize ROI and come to the crux of the topic today. And maybe I'll pause for just about 3-4 seconds to remind you that you can use the Q&A section in Zoom over here and ask me any questions you want on the go. So just don't forget to ask all questions you have in mind because I'm here for you today. Anyhow, step number 1. The core intent is to make employees the center of your engagement strategy, right? And what we mean by that is not talking about your company's quarterly cycle or annual cycle. What we mean by that is talking about the individual employee as the center. For example, if you see the screen right now, it's all about the employee's clock from their 15th day of joining all the way till they leave, right? So most of us are very familiar with a 30, 60, 90 day where we individually as HR business partners drive certain proactive interventions. But where this scales up all the way till someone leaves at a workforce of maybe 1,000 or 10,000 employees, that's where it gets exciting. Because at every touch point, the questions should keep evolving as the employee matures in the system. If I'm completing 30 days, I need to be asked questions around my induction, my onboarding. If I'm completing 90 days, I need to be asked questions around my manager helping me reach my full potential. And as I spend more time in the organization, the questions keep maturing because it's all about me as the employee in the center and not the company, right? Now, having said that, we realize that there are actually 2 kinds of moments when employees are statistically likely to leave the organization. Number 1 is, of course, this time-based frequency, which of course drops over time because the average tenure these days is about 1 to 2 to 3 years. That's where you can do a quarterly initiative, right? After 3 years, maybe you can do biannual and gradually decline as the employee spends more time in the organization. The second one is actually moment-based triggers. So if you look at a moment which causes distress, you could have a performance appraisal, a very common one. You could have a manager change. You could have a project change. You could have a location change, and all kinds of moments which cause a, let's say, distress or disengagement. So in all of these moments, you need to have a friend, right? And in that moment, you can have a pulse initiative, a trigger to understand how your employees are really feeling. And this is a drastic shift from having a survey that's sent to everybody at the same time, whether it's once a year or once a week, right? And just here's a tip for all of you guys, regardless of these frameworks and the science behind this, is that the frequency should actually match your ability to drive action. Because I was recently in Denver, Colorado at an employee engagement conference where surprisingly enough, the federal government was open enough in front of the entire audience of 300 people. The HR of the federal government went ahead and said that they were doing annual engagement surveys with 100 questions and they were sick of it. And similarly, there was GE on the other hand, where General Electric was doing daily engagement surveys and they were not able to drive action. And these are 2 extremes we must avoid because annual engagement surveys, we all know, are way too slow. And daily engagement surveys, on the other hand, were not able to keep up with the action. And of course, action planning becomes your number 1 problem. And we recommend that a minimum usually is monthly, right? Monthly actions are definitely doable at scale, right? So therefore, reach out should not be on a frequency higher than a monthly basis. So a daily or a weekly will definitely bomb unless you have the capability in-house to act on that frequency. So that's step number 1 for all of you guys. Step number 2 is even more interesting. And before step number 2, I'd like to cover another example of how you can look at the employee experience as the center. Why you see the employee experience as the center is everything is from my experience as an employee. It's my organization culture. It is my work, my team, my manager. Feel free to take a screenshot because this is a framework we've developed over the last 7 years, right? To really understand the key drivers behind employee experience, where the employee is the center, right? Anyway, moving on. Step two is one of my favorites because you can actually add a certain level of humanity to the conversations that you have. Now, compared to, let's say, a survey today, which is just a mere tool, a link that comes in your inbox, you click that, you have these boring white boxes, yes or no buttons, you just want to skim through it really fast. And it's the most irritating piece of initiative that's ever come across an employee's inbox because it has 100 questions, it takes hours to complete, and you get dozens of reminders. So clearly that's the problem. So here's how you can consider doing it at your end. The first step is to really make it conversational and decide that we are not going to take a survey strategy. The intent is to have a chat, right? The intent is to have a conversation. And if you have to have a conversation, you need an identity. I mean, a tool can't have a chat, but a person can. At least in our case, we like to call her Amber, but you could call her anything. So if you have a conversation, make sure there is a persona and identity behind it. You could even brand the identity Amber in this case as the CEO's assistant or the HR leader's assistant. And that way there is a sense of relationship with the identity that's established over time. Right? And people like to welcome that identity. And the way you can increase the relevance of this identity, and we'll call her Amber for today, the way you can increase the relevance of Amber is by ensuring that she actually remembers what you said last time. For example, if Kathy's on this call and Amber's been speaking to her, Amber would say, Kathy, last time you said you had a challenge with your manager. Has that changed? Kathy, last time I understood that there was a goal setting problem. Has that changed? So if somebody is talking to Kathy 10 times in a row, the bare minimum expectation Kathy should have is, at least you remember what I said last time. And that's the point behind increasing relevance. And if Kathy is sharing feedback saying my onboarding was done half-heartedly, my manager was pathetic, at least we can have Amber or your conversational bot empathize and say, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Oh, that's not nice. So that basic level of humanity that's gone missing from all of our initiatives, something as basic as HR, we're so busy with transactional work around performance appraisals, around payrolls, etc. We forget to take out time and have the patience to empathize. And the beauty is you can actually productize that in your strategy. So that's step two. Moving on to step three now. Step three is all about making sure your actions are done on time. And like I said earlier, a monthly intervention is perhaps the best way to go about this, where you could drive proactive interventions for your high performers or your high potential employees. For example, you can see on my screen that Andrew Anderson is a high performer who is most likely to leave or ideally disengaged in this case. You can make sure you drive proactive interventions and drive monthly action plans to make sure that these individuals are acted on time. How that looks? It looks like this on your screen. What you notice is that Andrew is a critical resource in Connecticut. He's working in the product function. He left at the 18-month mark, and you can clearly track exactly when things went wrong, right? And the beauty is that if there was a proactive intervention done at the 3-month mark, maybe, just maybe, right, there would have been a way to save Andrew. And how this fundamentally changes the life of an HR business partner today is an HR business partner needs to stop wasting time on skip meetings, focus group discussions, pulse surveys, 30, 60, 90s, walks, CEO one-on-ones, all kinds of these feedback collection activities, and fundamentally look at action as the primary agenda, right? Because it is a lack of action fatigue and not a survey fatigue. So if action is 99% of the agenda, and the remaining 1% of feedback collection is outsourced to somebody like Amber or any other initiative that you pick up, that's perhaps a better way to go about it. And the ultimate goal here is to reduce the HR business partner to employee ratio. I've personally noticed an average of 100 to 200, that for every 200 employees or 100 employees, you'll have one HR person dedicated to their engagement. So that's how you can sort of reduce that to focus on a limited set of individuals who can actually do something about that feedback and act on it, like I said. Moving on. Another pause for another perhaps 5-6 seconds to remind you that once again, you can ask me any questions you want today. You can be brutally honest. You can be as direct as you want, because I love questions, right? But at the same time, I felt it's a very good opportunity to formally introduce Amber to you. We like to call her our daughter because she was born about 3-4 years back. We work very hard to add a certain level of humanity to perhaps an AI-based system. And here's what she looks like. So meet Amber. She's been talking to about 300,000 employees, like Kathy said. She's been working and she's been hired by about 100 plus enterprises in 50 countries across the world. And what she can do for you is she can identify proactively who are those employees in your organization, who are your top talent who are happy, unhappy, or about to leave, and give that to you on a daily basis. Not annual, not quarterly, not monthly, daily. Right? And that's how you can make sure you're always on top of your game, right? But if you want to see how she works, here's perhaps an opportunity for me to shut up and for you to see how she works in action. Say hello to Amber. You're going to notice the pin drop silence and observe what a conversation between Amber and Andrew looks like. All right. So what you saw on your screen was a combination of multiple choice questions and open-ended questions. Most of them were, of course, pre-configured to give Amber a sense of direction, right? At the same time, what you'll notice is that Amber introduced her friend Anonymous Bat towards the end. Anonymous Bat is, of course, meant for perhaps those 20% cynical employees who will never open up despite any form of trust provided. So it's always available as a backup to Amber, number one. Number two is Anonymous Bat can be used for harassment cases, discrimination cases, and all kinds of ethical issues which need, let's say, a mask in isolated and extreme moments, right? It's very important to have a backup, but the primary strategy is always to go with a face, right? And what you'll notice is Amber can understand paragraphs, she can decipher sentiments and respond accordingly as the conversation continues. But one of my favorite parts of Amber is once all that is done, you can actually see, just a moment, you can actually see the daily report in your inbox. What you see is Andrew is that high performer and he's really not happy. So you see that every day. And every day there's a different person because every now and then there is somebody or the other talking to Amber. Today I might complete 5 years at this company. Tomorrow Paul might complete 10 years or 3 years like it says. This is your entry to something like Amber. And of course you can go with any solution out there, but the idea is to make sure you have real-time daily access with names for hypos. right? And shout out to Randy and Rachel. I do see your questions. I'll make sure I answer them towards the end of the call. And for the other 100 people on this call, please take out time, take out some headspace to ask me any questions. I'd love to take them. Moving on, we're very proud to say that, of course, unfortunately, AI is a buzzword across the world, but we've actually built some real artificial intelligence by moving it in-house, right? So we do not leverage or sit on top of an IBM Watson or a Google or any of these AI libraries out there. We've actually hired individuals from MIT to build it in-house. And here's why. 2 years back, there was a very interesting story where what ended up happening was an employee responded saying that I'm really unhappy with my manager, and Amber responding saying, I'm so glad to hear that. So clearly there was something fundamentally wrong where Amber got the sentiment entirely incorrect. And over a period of time, we realized that the inaccuracies in Google and IBM existed because of the following reasons. And here's what the reason was. All of these public libraries are actually built on public information. So for example, a statement like, there is politics in my company, Google, IBM always mark that as a neutral sentiment because it is civil politics, election politics. Whereas when it comes to corporate politics, it's an extremely negative word. So moving our AI in-house allowed us to add a corporate specific context and make sure the accuracies are higher than anything that's ever existed. Right? So that's number one. Number two is, another problem is when you get dozens and tons of qualitative responses, it's really hard to skim through them individually. So what we're able to do, very similar to a glass door, is to sort of bucket them in these areas that you see on my screen and give a negativity score, right? And for example, here clearly you can see recognition is an action point. But of course, where I'd like to move on and summarize Amber and what she's done for all of these 100 customers is she's been able to deliver an average of a 20x ROI. In this specific case, she's saved $250,000. And she's also saved 30,000 hours by just reducing the HR's time and spent in collecting employee feedback and reducing that ratio by only focusing on the high performers who need attention, right? What I'd like to summarize, Amber, for you is, number one, for the employees, Amber can make their voice feel heard and valued. For you as the HR, Amber can help you move from transactional exercises to pure consultative exercises with your managers. And this is where I'd love to introduce you to the last point in our call. Yet again, a shout out to make sure you're asking your questions. I'd love to invite GE Healthcare CEO to share her perspective on how they've worked with us across the globe. Just give me a moment.
We have, as GE, over 350,000 employees. We operate in more than 160 countries. So we're extremely focused on the diversity. So our populations of employees truly represent the melting pot of the world.
What we wanted to do is, as things evolve, why not we stay ahead of the curve and really figure out how we can be more effective.
How do we enable people to, bring their best to work?
How can we really focus our efforts around understanding what's happening with employees using a different channel?
Even here in India, our employees are just really distributed. You're never going to have the direct connect enough. It'll never be enough. No matter how hard you work at it, it's not enough. So the idea that I'm interacting with something like Amber, I don't, and it's done so well, it feels human, it feels natural, the language is natural, it feels like I'm really talking to somebody who is listening to me. This is a way, I think, to cost effectively engage with employees in a more, and on their clock, not our clock, on their clock.
The population which has gone through this, there is a significant improvement on the engagement index, on how they relate to the strategy of the company. I think we'll move much faster will make a huge difference in how we are a strategic partner for a business versus being seen as an administrative function which is there. It's not just the newcomers, or as we call them, millennials, who connect with Amber or embrace it. In our case, we have leveraged it with people with 40 years of experience.
Even though we're a 125-year-old company, I think it's been surprising how quickly it got adopted.
The data shows that people are engaging, they're sharing their feelings, and of things people have shared, the kind of responses we have seen. It's phenomenal. It's significantly higher than the people who respond to any kind of survey. The HR was unanimously across different regions, so ASEAN, India, Africa. Very, very positive feedback, which was a huge surprise for me. HRs are evolving and are focusing more on more value-adding work versus they being replaced.
The world is more and more uncertain. The pace of change is much faster. So I think our old established models just simply don't serve our employees as they once were able to. And I think, again, bringing Amber in and this whole idea of trying something different is a part of what we are as a culture.
All right. I lag, and I'm sorry for that. But yet again, a huge shout out to Mariana and Ashley for asking 2 more questions. I encourage everybody else to keep asking questions. I'd love Kathy to open a quick poll just to sort of see what the sentiment is in the room. So over to you, Kathy.
The poll has been opened for the audience, and we will just leave that open about 30 seconds. We're starting to get the responses in now. Thank you to everyone who's putting in their response. Okay, 5 more seconds, everyone, and then I'm going to close it off. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. All right, so another question before we move on to questions from everybody is the second poll. Over to you, Kathy, again.
Okay, everyone, the next poll has been launched. If you can put in your feedback, thank you very much. All right, we're getting lots of responses in. Thank you to the audience for your participation. We'll leave it open just about 5 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close it off and I'll share these results with everyone.
Very interesting. We see that actionable reports is a winner. And of course, we understood that lack of action fatigue is definitely a problem with the employees as well. So we're all aligned. Glad to hear that. All right. So for those of you who haven't asked any questions, this is your moment to shine. I would love to start with Randy Starr, please. Randy asks, if you survey hundreds of employees, would you suggest they put their name on the survey? So Randy, here's how I'll react. The core methodology behind at least the new approach to engagement is to make sure that, yes, they do put their name on the survey. Having said that, the access of that data cannot be with their immediate managers. Because like we heard, 60% of individuals who trust a stranger more than their own manager. It's very critical to make sure that they are able to send their feedback to a centralized team, which does not include the manager. Usually we've seen that it's perhaps the CEO office and the HR team with, of course, just 2 or 3 HR business partners. And we make sure that before the chat starts, every employee sees the following trust statement you see on my screen. Right? So of course, the employee is crystal clear on why it's not anonymous, it's confidential, it's with a central team, which you can trust, not just with the confidentiality, but a promise of action as well. Right? So that's how we feel about this, Randy, but I'm sure we'll have some counter questions. Feel free to ask. Moving on to Rachel Abraham, is Amber able to be integrated with the current company chat software such as Microsoft Teams? Yes, so Amber integrates with a lot of products. I'd love to pop that on your screen right away. So what you see on my screen is most of the products we typically integrate with. Microsoft Teams can be done as well because it's simply an extension of Skype, which is also under Microsoft now. At the same time, I can also follow on with Ashley's question. Would you recommend that the AI system be integrated in a company's internal website, HRIS system, or would employees receive a link to participate in the survey via email? So an HRIS integration is, of course, integral. The way we do this is within the pilot or within the test phase. Some companies rely on Excel uploads because it's very easy to get started, perhaps in a matter of days. Right after that, the HRMS or HRIS integration is meant to fetch performance data and basic data. However, for the push notifications, we recommend a link, and here's why. In the early days, we launched a mobile application in excitement, and we realized that it completely bombed on our face. Why? Because there was a lot of friction in downloading an app. In fact, I myself have 240 apps on my phone. So there is, of course, friction for 241. Additionally, a sign up, a login is also a pain. So here's what we did. When perhaps Kathy completes 5 years at GE, hypothetically, she would get an email which is personalized and automated from the CEO. And this email would say, "Hi, Kathy, congratulations on completing 5 years at GE. On this special day, I'd love to have you chat with our new culture assistant, Amber, because we care about how you feel. Here's a link." And that link can be accessed on the mobile or the desktop. If the link is not enough, we also do reminders on Microsoft Teams, on Skype, on text messages, and even HR systems. But we recommend the primary avenue as emails because it's the most commonly adopted and formal way of communication for a CEO's assistant. So I hope that answers Rachel and Ashley together. Mariana asks, would you be able to show the EX slide again? It's not included in the deck. I'm sorry, everybody. We evolved the deck in the last few hours. We can send you the new one. But here's the entire presentation on the X framework. So we have a very strong people science team. I'd be happy to cover the basics first. We have 7 key drivers and 59 elements within them, right, for every touch point from an employee's first day to last day of joining. And EX stands for employee experience, as you all know. Within each of these drivers, you can see the elements as Mariana asked for it. Mariana, feel free to take a screenshot right away. And I'll make sure that you also have this accessible at any point of time. All right. So another question we've been asked is, another one by Sankalp is, do the frequent Amber reach outs lead to survey fatigue? Very good question, Sankalp, because if this is not configured properly, what usually ends up happening is employees, of course, start to ignore the conversation. So what we've noticed is that, like I said, for the first 2 years, and let me pop that up right away. For the first 2 years, the conversation starts off on a monthly basis in the first 90 days. After that, a quarterly basis for the next 1.5 years. After 2 years, it drops to biannual. And after 5 years of joining, it perhaps drops to annual. Yes, most of this is configurable based on your organization's context, but making sure that the frequency is aligned to the employee's clock and how much time they spend in the company, it does not lead to survey fatigue. But what we've also noticed is that if there is a lack of action for over a period of 90 days, Amber actually backfires because there is a lack of action fatigue. And I hope that's not repetitive, but that's something we all need to learn. It's lack of action fatigue and not survey fatigue. Moving on to Gail, did the head of federal government indicate an interest in this product? Were they from the OPM? Very good question. I'm sorry, I don't remember because in Denver, Colorado, this was a conference with 300 people. One of the people scientists on stage asked a question that, what is your biggest problem with employee engagement surveys? And within seconds, this lady, I remember it was a lady, she raised her hand. She said, I'm from the federal government. Everybody turned their heads. And then she said, we're doing annual engagement surveys with 100 questions. Everybody started laughing. And that was definitely a conversation worth noting. But of course, I had to fly out and didn't get a chance to speak with her. I'd love to. If you know her, please do the introduction, Gail. I would really love that. All right, the next one. Samira Khan asks, is it suitable for enterprises? Are you working with any? Yes, so we've been working with over 100 enterprises in 50 countries. I'd love to show you, of course, a list of some of these enterprises. You might recognize a Pepsi, a Coca-Cola, a GE Healthcare, a Dover, a Puma. Most of these you will recognize. I'd love to call out that one of our biggest challenges has been to address cultural nuances in countries like China, Australia, and global workforces, because a Pepsi also has employees in the USA and China, where sometimes empathy can be perceived as sarcasm. Like if someone says, I'm so sorry to hear that, it might be perceived as sarcasm. So these cultural nuances are, of course, very critical. It's been very helpful for us to work with, of course, over 50 countries, like you can see on my screen. Moving on to Tricia Downey, I see she says, love Amber, just that check-in will help alleviate some people's stress interpretation. If your leadership/decision makers have no interest in engaging employee engagement, any advice on opening their eyes to the ROI? Any good websites to which they may be directed who are interpreting the subject in for dummies fashion? What a beautiful question, Trisha. So let me give you a story. I was very recently giving a speaker session at Mercer, right? And at Mercer's office, there were about 400 attendees. Where I'd thrown this question to the entire audience: what is your number one challenge in implementing employee engagement products at your company? And in unison, the answer was getting a leadership's buy-in. Right. So here's some background I understood from that room. I'm not sure if it applies to you. What I understood was that the definition of employee engagement has more often than not been misperceived by leadership as employee fun activities, whether that's celebrations, birthdays, sport events, etc. Whereas sometimes leadership hasn't really been conveyed or understood the reality of what employee engagement really is. So presumably, if you've already made that or crossed that hurdle, here's what I suggest. We do have a blog, right? And we keep writing regular content on why employee engagement is a critical agenda. Of course, half the companies in this world have made that jump. But what I'm very proud of is, and I'll share this with you as well, is how CEOs themselves, right, have been sharing thought leadership on why engagement is critical. And the only way to sort of convince a CEO is to have another CEO sort of talk about how they made a mark in their company. Another thing, and a last one to cover your answer, is nobody wants to be a CEO with an unhappy team, right? And if I walk up to a CEO, we've worked with group companies which have 100 plus CEOs. The last thing they want to hear is, you as a CEO have the most unhappy business unit that exists in our company. Right? So that's also another way we've seen most individuals address the leadership point, but I'd love to address this offline. We can hop on a call very soon. All right, so the next one is, Ashley again, have you seen that employees are more likely to complete a survey with Amber? Very good question. We've seen an average response rate of 70%, where we've seen it go as high as 90% in organizations with less than 1,000 employees, and as low as 50% in organizations with more than 50,000 employees. We actually are working with a customer that has 93,000 employees on Amber. So we've covered the entire spectrum, right? So the range is from 50 to 90, depending on your organization size. Moving on, Mariana says, super, thanks a lot. You're welcome, Mariana. Rajendra says, how do you make sure that employees completely open up to Amber? And what's the accuracy of attrition predictions made by Amber like? Very good questions. So With regards to the honesty piece, I'd love to reiterate the trust statement that I showed to you a while ago. It's very critical to not just show the fact that it's confidential via the trust statement, limit access to a central team. It's also important to make sure you reiterate this fact in your monthly town halls or in your monthly sessions that, yes, thank you for your feedback. That said, all of the data that you shared is entirely confidential. So it's very important to keep reiterating that to make sure that employees believe in the trust over time. And yes, Raj, like we've also observed that over the last few years, there is some baggage of mistrust, and this journey will not be easy. But of course, at the end of the day, you have to build a culture of trust first and then establish engagement. Regarding the accuracy of the attrition predictions, we recently reached a ballpark of 60, where 60% is something we've seen in our top three cases so far. How we've done that is very interesting, and I perhaps didn't have time to cover this today. What we've done is we've understood the implicit indicators that are applicable with regards to somebody leaving an organization or being disengaged. What you saw right now was Amber and her chat on her screen. Let me pop that up again. But what we've also noticed is, what if somebody's not talking to Amber, right? What if somebody's completely ignoring Amber despite reminders from the CEO and of course the HR? That in itself represents disengagement. So silent users is another implicit indicator. We've been able to build in our algorithm. We've also been able to build in how people are behaving with Amber and how their counterparts are behaving with Amber. For example, if 7 employees are unhappy with their manager, perhaps the 8th one as well is unhappy, or there is at least an inclination towards an unhappiness or disengagement, right? So there are multiple such implicit indicators. I can't cover all of them. There are dozens of them to make sure that our attrition prediction accuracy shoot up. That said, we don't want to address attrition only, because people who are cutting a 9 to 5 in your organization and are perhaps not giving it their 100%, are cynical on the floor, are actually more dangerous than the ones who are actually at the risk of leaving, right? So I hope that answers your question. Moving on, I see Mariana saying she fully agrees that hearing from another CEO influences CEOs. Thank you so much. Lindsay says, when initially adopting Amber, how much skepticism is there to open up? How long does it take to get to 70% response rate? Wow, good one. So here's what we do, and here's what we've learned over time. What we've learned is in the early days, we never introduced Amber formally as an engagement bot. We thought it may be in our favor to introduce her as a human being. And then we realized that not being honest about the fact that she's a bot, even though 40% employees thought that she's real, didn't work in our favor. So here's what we did. Whenever Amber is launched at a company, and let me pop up something on my screen meanwhile, whenever Amber is launched at a company, there is actually a campaign that's run in the name of a new employee has joined GE who is not a human being. So when someone sees such a subject line, a campaign under that title, right, that's where employees really get intrigued by the fact that, okay, HR is doing something new, or the CEO has launched something refreshing. So it instantly kicks off the initiative. It, of course, creates this initial euphoria around what this thing is. So, of course, reaching a 70% within the first, of course, 60 to 90 days is a cakewalk. The challenge usually starts after, let's say, 60 to 90 days, where you want to sustain that initial euphoria and you want to make sure that trust builds over time. Of course, there is a blog online, help.infeeder.com. A lot of people would have questions around the honesty. Yes, there are multiple CEOs, like Mariana said, who can convince your CEOs around the honesty bit. They can talk about anything with regards to the response rates. It's all over here, right? I just wanted to make sure this is accessible to you, to make sure that all of your questions are deeply answered. For example, one of the points I forgot to cover is Amber actually reaches out to employees from the CEO's desk. vis-a-vis the HR's desk, right? So employees are able to understand the importance of it compared to any other HR initiative. And since Amber congratulates the employees on these special moments and doesn't randomly disrupt their days, of course, employees tend to appreciate that moment. And that moment is well timed to seek honest and helpful and constructive feedback. But I just want to come back to the questions and see if I've missed anything else. Yes, we've been asked 3 more questions. Bhavan asked that are Amber chats customizable? So at the current moment, the Amber chats are customizable only from a frequency standpoint. For example, instead of a 30, 60, 90, if you want to do a 15, 45, 90, right? So of course, we have a limited set of guidelines. Within those guidelines, you can choose to customize the frequency. You can choose to configure the questions from within our question bank. Having said that, can you design your interaction on your own? We currently don't allow that because we believe that extreme customizations might take away the essence of what Amber is trying to do over here. I'll take 2 more questions, and I love the number of questions we're getting today. I see Bhavan again asking, have companies with dispersed workforce seen success with Amber? We have a lean HR team. A very good question, because I've noticed that the gig economy is kicking in pretty fast, where remote jobs seem to be the trend these days. And if you have offices in over like 10 countries, 10 cities, and you just have an HR team centrally of 3, 4 people, it can get challenging. Yes, we've definitely seen Amber implemented there, but they've done something very different. What they've done is made sure they have a regular monthly cadence, just 30 minutes or 60 minutes, where the ownership of acting on Amber's feedback is with the business heads, right? So within that perhaps 16-minute meeting, the HR team can consult the business heads and provide them actionables. Like all of you said, actions are your number 1 priority. Within those 60 minutes, provide actionables to your business heads and keep checking in on those actionables every 30 days. And of course, Amber will find out a change score for you, because she will keep asking, Kathy, last time you said you had a problem with your manager. Has that changed? Right? So with that, Amanda has another question. Does Amber conduct exit interviews? Wow. I have something special for you today. Just give me a moment. All right, so I'm trying to hunt for a slide which talks about, yes. Okay, so yes, Amber does conduct exit interactions. She does 2 things. Number 1, during the notice period, Amber tries to work on improving the exit process, because somebody who will leave a company will not come back if the exit process in itself was a nightmare. The second thing Amber does is, after the background check is done, after the full and final activities are done, after everything is done, detached, 60 days after leaving, Amber will do a post-exit interview and understand the real reason why, in this case, Kathy left, or the real reason why somebody is really disheartened or disengaged. Is there any ethical issue? Is there any harassment issue? Is there anything that the employee who's exited wants to raise, which nobody was otherwise able to raise? And one of my favorite features within the exit module happens to be the shared feedback post-leaving action. And what I mean by that is, if I am leaving GE today, I could literally write down all of my feedback and mark a date 60 days later that only after I leave, send this feedback to my company. That way, my background check, my full and final, is completely safe and not affected. So Amanda, yes, we do exit interviews. Yes, we're doing pilots aggressively, and we'd love to have your feedback. With that, Kathy has given me a strict warning to finish at the 55-minute mark. We're done with 55 minutes, and I'd love to hand it back to Kathy. And thank you so much for a wonderful evening, guys.
Well, thank you so much. This concludes our webcast today. I would like to thank our presenter as well as all of you for joining us. If you would like to view this webcast again, the archive recording and slides will be available on hr.com very shortly. If you're looking for your Webcast credits, they will show up in your HR.com account within 2 business days. We also send out an email with the credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment and fill out the exit survey. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.